Welcome to Faith Community. If you're a guest here, or if your address has changed, or any of your contact information has changed, if you'd fill out one of the ministry opportunity cards at your table, that'll help us out, make sure that we know how to get a hold of you or find you. If you're a guest, it allows us to follow up and connect with you after this morning. You'll see that for those who are at Faith, they know this, or at least they know how we do it. Maybe not why. At Faith, we do things a tad different, and so we throw the sermon, teaching, message, Jesus monologue, whatever you want to call it, at the beginning of the service, as a chance to kind of help us bring our thoughts and the craziness of our lives and the busyness and the distractions to the forefront of our service. And then we build our service to what we call the most important part of our week, which is us celebrating in communion together. That reminder that the body and the blood of Christ are the covenant that we hold and that we sit under as believers and followers of Jesus. We're kicking off a new series this morning. It's from the theme for the year, which is Serve God, Serve Others. We signed the poster on anniversary weekend, and that's still on the back table. So if you haven't signed that yet and you want to commit to Faith Community for another year and the work that we are going to do and the way that we're going to grow and learn and serve as a community, we invite you to sign that. But with that, we wanted to kind of, over the next few weeks, what it looks like and what it means when we talk about serving God and serving others. And it's easy to come at this one level where we can talk a lot about ways to serve or things you should do to serve or opportunities that you have for serving. And it can easily become this checklist which just becomes overwhelming of all this stuff that you have to do. But that really doesn't get us to the heart of what Christ talks about when he talks about serving, because you can serve in that regard and not have your heart in it. And when I talk about heart, I'm not talking about the emotional way that we talk about our hearts, but I'm talking about the core of who you are. And so you can serve and not be there, not be in it, not be present, just as you can be here in our communal worship space and not have a heart of worship. So we want to talk less about a list of things that you do that look like serving. We're going to talk more over the next few weeks about what serving looks like from kind of the heart perspective, what it means to take kind of that posture of serving in the way that Christ spoke about it. To help us with this key component, because it's very central to the heart of what Faith Community has become and what Faith Community has been for a long time, I thought I'd give a very brief run-through of the history of Faith Community. The church began in 1998 under Al Hazen and a group who began to meet in the James's basement. In their beginning, while they started at a basement, they began to move to different locations in the community, renting different spaces at a storefront, at a church, at a couple of different church locations, big services at the fairgrounds. And they did this for 4 years until they had this space where they were able to build the building out here. As they began, as most things begin fresh, there was a lot of energy, and there was things were new and things were fresh and things were vibrant. The members were excited. They were engaged. They were anxious to see what God was going to do in this church that was on a mission from God to love the world. This mission statement that had kind of come from the Blues Brothers movie that kind of stimulated the seriousness that they were on a mission from God, but also this casualness that, hey, we're able to laugh and enjoy and kind of take things lightly, not take ourselves too seriously. This was all happening when I was at Anderson University. I had met, it was mine and Cammie's sophomore year, where we kind of began our relationship, and she was telling me about what her parents were involved with in Noblesville with this church. And during our dating season, we came a couple times to services in Noblesville to visit family, but also just to see what was going on here. And I always thought it was an interesting concept and an interesting model and atmosphere that Faith Community had. In 2001, Al played a part in the service of getting Cammie and I married, and then we began our ministry in Huber Heights Church of God as youth and outreach pastor. During that time, then Al took me under his wings, and he and I would meet about every other month in Richmond, Indiana at Cracker Barrel. And we kind of maintained this relationship and friendship of being mentored in ministry. I was able to kind of come to him with everything that I was seeing new, realizing that what I'd been trained and learned in college didn't really apply to what hands-on ministry looked like in the church. And he, being in ministry for 25 years with the church, he was able to kind of share some of the pains and the frustrations that he had seen during that time. And so we would share stories and frustrations and pains, and then we would a little bit as well. We talk about how in the late 90s, really the church in general across the landscape of America hadn't really moved beyond the 1950s in its cultural understanding. And so the church, when you came into the church, was like stepping into a time travel machine. Church still felt very 1950s, felt like an old culture, an old standard, an old relationship, and it was very disconnected from the outside world and the conversations that were happening on there. So we knew that we weren't really meeting as a church. We weren't meeting the needs. We weren't hearing the needs and serving the needs of those who were outside of our churches. And so that frustrated us because we knew we were leaving something on the table when it came to ministry within the church. In 2002, Faith had moved into its building, and I remember meeting with Al and him talking about how the energy changed. That now as they became located here, disengagement set in. There became this expectation that he was supposed to do things, or things were supposed to be done a certain way that he felt was very different than what they had been in their years of being nomadic. And he was kind of frustrated at that because there were these expectations that seeped in that were different than what they'd been for 4 years. Something that they'd been cultivating and trying to be. It's as if people kind of turned back around and wanted things to be like they were at previous churches that they had been at. And he wasn't sure what to do with that. In the same way, we were just kicking into our ministry, building relationships with our students. We had started with 8 students, had moved to a place of 20 to 25 students in our student ministry, working with the church in Huber Heights, Ohio. Al called me shortly about a week or two after Easter in 2003. They had just released their associate, and he offered me the job. He said, "Hey, I want you to come and work with us at Faith Community, help us rediscover who we are and what we should be doing in the church and in the world." And so he said, "Think about it, and let's get together and get breakfast." And so came and I thought about it, prayed about it. We really liked the opportunity of being able to work with Al in some reasons. But when it came down to it, we felt like things were just picking up momentum for us in Ohio. And so Al and I met for breakfast, and I told him that it wasn't the right time. We couldn't move, that we felt like we were just kind of getting our feet planted firmly in the ground. He said, "Oh, I'm disappointed to hear that. I was hoping you'd show up and say, 'Yeah, put me in, coach.'" He said, "That's okay." He said, "Ministry changes." And he says, "At some point, your ministry will change. When that happens, contact me, let me know. I want to do ministry with you before I retire." This caught me off guard because I had done a number of church interviews prior to taking my position in Ohio. And none of the interviews ended that way. It was, "Oh, you're not the right fit," or me saying to them, "You're not the church I want to be at," whatever the case was. God bless you, and you went on your way. So to have someone say, "Well, that's okay if it doesn't work now. I'm willing to wait until a time that does work, and I'll leave that door open." Well, sure enough, a year later, things changed in our position in that ministry. The focus and the idea of what the church where it wanted to go was not in line with where I feel like God was calling us. And Cammie and I knew it was our time to move on. And so I called Al and I said, "Hey, we're leaving. We're ready to move on. We're ready to try something else. Glad to come and do it in Noblesville, I think, with you, if that opportunity is still present." And so they talked. Now, during this time, in that year that he invited me until the time I came back to him and said I was interested, I'd been over here a couple of times. It had I forget what it was called, Family Leadership Council. You guys had a larger group of people having. Do you remember what it was? Family Council, where they had about 20 or 30 different folks in the congregation that would meet on a monthly basis and just kind of carry the conversation to the church. And so I had come over a couple times and helped lead and speak on ways to look outside the church and the changing cultures and the changing generations that were happening and ways that we could minister to them. And they were always fun conversations to be had. And so the time came for the church was willing to bring me in as a candidate for the weekend to interview me to see what the fit was like. And so Cammie and I came over. We had just had Jada, so we were just entering into what it was like as being a family. And we spent the weekend over here and sat in a number of conversations and interviews, and the church decided to call me for that role. And so I would come over and I'd work with the families, particularly with the youth and the students. But Al was bringing me on to kind of help figure out what was the DNA of Faith Community now. The fear was that they just didn't become another brick building here in Noblesville with a cross on the side of it. And so I came in for a reason and came in to do a certain role. And so we came over. Have these conversations, Al and Kathy and I, and we'd involve and work alongside the board and the family council, trying to implement and try some different things, trying to figure out what sacred cows did we need to sacrifice in the church culture to try and rediscover essentially what hangs on the banners, to get back to this place where we're one heart and one mind, where everything was shared, where everything had everyone had everything they needed. The church family would come and take care of them and support them. I remember I sat in my first board meeting, and there was a lot of tension going on. They had just, they had removed an associate pastor. About 40% of the church had left with that decision. There was a lot of things that they were working through as they continued to settle in this place. And I remember leaving my first board meeting thinking, what in the world did I get myself into? This isn't going to last long. So we continued to work through things. We tried to try things. We experimented with different stuff. The church was somewhat willing to experiment with us. We had conversations, faced some backlash, some contention as we tried some stuff until we kind of figured out where we were. All in this, we were trying to strip away everything that we had put on, that culture had told us to put on, that time had told us to put on, that seminary had told us to put on, all these processes of what it means to be church. We wanted to strip away and get back to what does it actually look like for a body of believers to come transparently and honestly and vulnerably before Christ and the cross and say, use us. And so it was a process, and it wasn't an easy process, and there were lots of difficult, hard conversations and lots of emotions that were hurt from time to time, but we made some progress. And Al was a great mentor. He showed great leadership to me through those years. I learned a ton from him in doing that. And it began to shape. Faith began to shape. It began to take form. On a mission to God to love the world, this anthem, this mission statement that was paired with a statement that the church had already put together called the Family Portrait. They'd put this together in their formation, and it was as I look at it now, it was a very prophetic statement that they had put together. Something that talked specifically about, as a body of believers, this isn't about what we do, but it was about being. It was about who we are as people, what makes us who we are, not what we're able to do and accomplish on the outside. And so as we did this for 7-8 years of trying to figure out our identity, trying to strip ourselves and put on more of Christ and to get away of old systems and try to put in new systems and new character, a new culture, a new atmosphere, it came time for Al to resign. And Kathy resigned with him, and the church called me to be lead pastor. It was something they thought about. It wasn't just Al left and now Patrick gets in. That was one that they had to step back and sit and think about and decide whether or not they wanted to call me. And so they offered me that. I gladly took it because of the work we had done. And in doing that, then we began working hard from day one with that board of going through a series of what does it look like to be the church in today's world, where the culture outside is changing so fast and so different than where it had been even in the early 2000s, especially where it had been in the 1950s. And so with the help of a writer, church guide, Reggie McNeil, he gave us the freedom to ask some of the hard questions that we still hadn't figured out how to put into word. And through that, then, we began to shape who we were and what we were. And so we're going to talk about that over the next few weeks. But it comes back to one of the areas that it comes back to. It comes back to a number of pieces in Scripture. But one in particular is it comes back to Matthew 25. And I've got some bullet points in the bulletin if you want to make some notes and keep track of this as we go through. Matthew 25, verse 31 says this. It says, when the Son of Man comes into glory and all the angels with him, he'll sit upon his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered in his presence. And he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep at the right and the goats at his left. And the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me, and I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink, and I was a stranger, and you invited me in to your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. The righteous ones will reply, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will say, I tell you the truth, that when you did it for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me. There's this principle that comes through Scripture time again, that we can't love God without also loving others. To say it another way, we can't serve God without serving others. That if we want to have access to God, if we want to walk in our faithfulness to God, that includes and requires that we make sure that we also engage with others in a way that would represent Christ as the way he would have us to do it. I was introduced to this text. I'd probably heard it in my upbringing at church, but it didn't register with me until I was at Anderson University. I was in it was an elementary mathematics class. I already had my math credit for college, but I needed, I think, like 1 or 2 more hours to complete that, and I enjoyed mathematics. And so I was like, well, I don't really want to take college calculus. And so there was this elementary mathematics class, and I thought it was like how to teach mathematics in elementary school is what I thought it was. But it was more of a theory of mathematics once I got into it. You talked about base numbers and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, the professor, Dr. Saltzman, was an eccentric, very eccentric character. Great stories about Paul. And he and I were able to cultivate a friendship. But one of the things he would do early on in the semester is he would read this text. And then he would challenge the class and say, I hope you understand this. You don't get to consider yourself as one who walks with Christ if you ignore these areas. If you don't pay attention to the hungry, to the thirsty, to the naked, to those in prison, to those who are sick, if you don't serve them and minister to them, then you're missing what Christ is calling us to do. And so every Sunday, he would invite his students Sunday afternoon at 2:30 to meet outside the Commons and to go visit the nursing homes for about an hour every Sunday. To go and visit the people that were there who were usually forgotten, ignored, too sick to remember, too sick to care, whatever their story was. Now, I didn't make it every Sunday with him while I was there, but I did make it a number of times. And it began to introduce and show to me a different way of living out my faith and living out my Christianity. And so this began to influence the conversations that Al and I would have, and that we look and think and dream about of what does it actually look like to be these followers of Christ in this regard. Because when you read a scripture like this, you don't have those who are on time on Sunday morning will be my sheep. Those who sing well during the opening chorus, those will be my sheep. Those who give their tithe and their offering, those are the ones who will be my sheep. This text doesn't say that at all. And so oftentimes we've created in the church this standard of what it looks like to be a faithful follower while ignoring what Scripture explicitly lays out is what it looks like to be a faithful follower of one who God and Christ call their sheep. And so over the next 6 weeks, we're going to talk about what it looks like to minister to the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and those in prison. But I want to give you a brief introduction. Now, these may change a little bit as we go through the weeks with the summer schedule and the passing of Charlie and Dan this week. I didn't get enough time to spend honing some of these thoughts. So these may change as we go through. But I want to share a few thoughts of where we had these conversations in the formation and the maturity of Faith Community, but also what it means for us as individual followers of Christ. So when the text talks about the hungry, and there's a very explicit, like when you read this text and it speaks of the hungry and the sick and the naked and the imprisoned, like you should minister to those exactly as it says. Like not a whole lot of interpreting you need to do. Jesus speaks a lot in metaphor and simile and parable, and so there's a deeper understanding and interpretation that needs to be made at times, but there's also times where Jesus is very explicit. And so at one level, with each of these, that is a specific, explicit call that you should make sure you're ministering to people in those areas. However, there's also a deeper understanding and meaning of that. And we know this because when we hear and read the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, they do this. When Matthew speaks of the poor, he speaks of the poor. When Luke speaks of the poor, he speaks of the poor in spirit. So at one level, you're dealing with a material, economic, socioeconomic dynamic in one, and the other, you're dealing with a very spiritual dynamic. And it's that perspective that we're going to take in going through Matthew 25. So when we speak of the hungry, yes, we're actually talking about those who are hungry, those who are the majority of the people in this world who starve every day, trying to get just the basic nutrition that they need. But on the other side, we're talking about the hungry in the church. Because what the church did, what the church has created this reality that the church is a commodity, that the church has become like Walmart. And the expectation is that, well, I will come here and I will get my religious goods and services. I will get something to minister to my kids, to my teenagers, to my adults, to the elderly and the aging. So when there are the elderly and aging, it's the professional Christian's job to go and visit them, and it's not the job and the responsibility of every person who's seated here today. So that when we show up, we think that it's our opinion that matters, right? And we saw this in the 90s and the 2000s across the culture in the church, where the worship wars, as it was coined, was happening. And we still see the effects of it today where churches have contemporary and traditional services. Why? This isn't about your musical preference. This isn't about if you hear the songs that you like or you enjoy. This isn't about us trying to provoke or evoke from you some certain thing. This isn't you get to come in and get a punch request of how you'd like us to be served on Sunday morning or your midweek or whatever the case may be. And in doing this, we surrendered spiritual formation and responsibility away from our households, where it's been in the history of the church for centuries. And we gave it that power and that responsibility to a few professional Christians who'd had a certain education, who were now being paid for to take care of these things. And so we've done this as a culture where we've created this type of commodity. And for Faith, our focus was to change that, to try to compel and to equip and to empower each and every one of you to the standard that Paul talks about, to be a priesthood of all believers. You are all pastors, that you are all ministers, that each and every person who's here has their own ministry shaped around their equipping and their abilities and their giftedness and the stories and the passions that God has led you in. Now, that doesn't mean creating a 501c3 or setting up a parachurch ministry, but it's making sure that when it looks at what are you doing with the gifts that God's given you to minister to the actual people in the world, that you know what that looks like. And unfortunately, the church has not done a good job of equipping and empowering and compelling people to that. When it comes to the thirsty, we're not talking about dehydration. We're talking about the reality of when you feel parched. You know, For my dad, it was mowing the lawn and having a nice cold beer. Like that was that thing that when you're done, you go, that was, who just opened the can? Who just did the, thank you, Ross. Right on cue. That was it. Was that a beer? Yeah, that's. In the thirst, it's that type of refreshing thing that when you drink it, while you may not say it, it's that that was good, and it's satisfied. And so when it came to the thirsty spiritual culture that we had, it became this, where worship was this. I get to pick these things, and I get to tell you what to do, and these guys become the performers, and you become the crowd and the fans, and God is like the production manager who's watching it. And the reality is God is the audience. We sing for an audience of one, and you are the performers, and they're simply the gifted who are serving and doing their ministry. And back there, because if they're not back there, it also doesn't happen. Although if anything goes wrong, it's their fault. And so we understand and we change the worship space, and we became, right, we put worship bands front and center. When projectors came out, like we'd cover the cross in the sanctuaries so that we make sure we were putting words and videos up front. And it changed the posture, and it changed the personality, and it changed the expectation. And faith's focus, we want to go back to worship should be the expression of our faith lived out. That we go through our 6 and 7 days, and when we gather here on Sunday morning, it's the outflowing of what we've seen and partnered with God all week that pours out of this. Not this showing up and saying, okay, I'm spent, fill me up. Now, there are times when that needs to happen, where life has put you through that, and you show up and you just say, I'm broken, I need some mending, I need some healing, I need to do some grief work. But part of that is we own that. That we own our worship, so that we make sure that it's happening at the moment that we get up on Sunday morning, and that our worship experiences happen also on Monday and Tuesday and the other days of the week, and they don't just get secluded to Sunday morning at 10:30. The worship is a mindset and a lifestyle and a set in our heart, and that as we go through that, it becomes that was refreshing. The stranger. It was shortly after, I guess Jada was 3 or 4 years old. She was doing dance classes, and usually Cammie took Jada to dance, and she would sit and wait while Jada was in dance class. For whatever reason, one particular week, I had to take Jada up to dance class. And I don't know if it's just a general rule of thumb or whatever, but obviously most moms take their daughters to dance class, or sons. There were a few of them. So I'm sitting in this room with all these moms, and they're talking, and I'm just kind of wanting to disappear and hide. So I brought my book to read and try and be invisible at 6'3" and 300 pounds. I didn't do it very well. But I'd sit there, and I'd just kind of sit in the corner and read and kind of do my own thing and remain a stranger. And on the conversation, as the ladies were talking about all sorts of things, I wasn't really paying attention to. One of the ladies said to one of the other ladies, she says, "Oh, didn't I see you at church last Sunday?" And she said, "Oh, no, I don't think so." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." She's like, "No, I'm sure it was you." And she's like, "Oh, what church would that have been at?" And she named some church, and she's like, "Oh, no, because we don't go to church." And she's like, "Oh," she's like, "I would have swore it was you from the back of your head." And that was kind of this testimony of the declaration that we've had in church of we can all come in here and sit here, and we don't have to know anybody. That I can just kind of go through my faith experience with this certain amount of anonymity. I don't need to know anybody. I don't need anybody to know me. My thing, this religious thing is my thing. I get to own that, and it's private, and it's me, and I don't have to put myself out there. So faith's focus became this other thing where we realized that you can't do faith alone, that you have to do it with community, that you have to do it with engaging others and other lives, that you have to surround yourself with other people as you make this process together, because the best process for exercising grace and mercy and forgiveness and service is when we stumble through life together and practice and exercise that among ourselves before we take it out to the rest of the world. So we wanted to make sure that people looked at each other. It's why we sit at tables. And the dynamic that changes and invites in the culture that we have here. Naked. Man, we wear a lot of masks in our culture. It was one of the things that when Cammie and I evaluated coming to Noblesville, this is one of the big things that almost kept us from coming here, because we said, what in the world do we have to offer the rich community of Noblesville, that when I drive past the high school, the students who go there drive nicer cars than I will ever drive? That they're so content in the luxurious lifestyles that they have no need, no hunger, no desperation for God, because they're so self-content in the way that they live. I want to go somewhere where they're hungry, where they want to know God, where they want to see God, where their lives just cry out because they're so broken. We realize that even the rich and the wealthy, the well-to-do in this world, still need to hear from God. And so we came to minister in that way, living these very authentic lives, these very transparent lives. It was kind of one of the things that I'd always done. I'd learned it from my family, from being from Missouri, of just being myself, rough edges and all. And so to bring that into faith's DNA, where instead of our faith just being about our head knowledge, that our belief system just being about the doctrines and theologies that we could explain, or the way that we could argue with a non-believer about how they could believe Christ, because right belief was the doctrine of Christ. To change that to where it doesn't matter how much you know, how many Bible scriptures you're able to recite, how many Sundays you're able to attend on Sunday morning, how much you give, but it was about allowing your whole life, the messy parts as well as the good parts, to be revealed and seen and dealt with and met. That we are all sinners saved by grace. And so we all need to be able to step into the light and to be fully revealed in our naked, transparent selves in order for others to work and see and process with us to that place of goodness that God was leading us to. The transformation would be slow, that it would require us to be authentic, and that our authentic selves become this very messy self. Sick. We don't show our weaknesses. We don't show our failures. We don't show our embarrassments. We don't show our insecurities. The church became this place, and many churches became this place, that it was good for those who were holy, who already had it together, whose lives were put together, who could say the right things, know the right things, do the right things. Those were the ones that we wanted to be here. And it became this museum of sainthood as opposed to this hospital of sinners. That we recognize that when we show up here, we are beggars at the doorstep, saved by God's grace, not by our own efforts and our own attempt. Not that we stay in a life of sin, but that it's not our doing. It's the guiding and the direction of God and the guiding and the direction of others that helps us move beyond that place. And finally, prison. We heard this a lot, and it's a false narrative that still a lot of us deal with, that if you struggle with sin, then you must not have a strong enough faith. It's a lie that we tell our believers or that we insinuate with the people of our church. That if you still struggle with sin, if you still deal with addiction, if you still deal with temptations, then you must not be a very good believer. Some of you right now are like, that's not true. So for us to change that reality, the reality is there is no escape from sin in this world. Paul in himself says it's not me, but it's the sin that is within me that is causing me to do these things. So recognizing that regardless of what transformation may happen in this world, the reality is sin will always have an anchor and a hold on us. But it's the effects of sin that Christ and the church get to embody and relieve us from. Because that's where we find grace and mercy and patience and goodness, gentleness and kindness. Where the fruit of the Spirit become alive in our lives and in our community and the way that we operate, that we give one another freedom to break free from the chains of whatever it is that enslaves us. And knowing that it's different from every one of us, and that we don't get to pick that certain sins are better than the others. That we get to look at some things and say, oh, because you're a heavy drinker, that's a worse sin than those who live their lives being consumed by greed. And so it's these areas that we're wanting to serve. To serve God, to serve others, to serve ourselves, to serve one another. To recognize that we are each of these areas, that we're not just talking about the exact interpretation of these words, but the spiritual interpretation of these words. Richard Foster says this: nothing disciplines the inordinate desires of the flesh like serving others. Nothing transforms the desires of the flesh like serving in hiddenness. The flesh whines against service, but screams against hidden service. It strains and pulls for honor and recognition. It will devise subtle, religiously acceptable means to call attention to the service that it has rendered. But if we stoutly refuse to give in to this lust of the flesh, we can crucify it. And every time that we crucify our flesh, we crucify our pride and our arrogance and create room for Christ to live and work in our lives. To serve God and to serve others means we honestly have to look at ourselves and realize that we have work to do. And we're trusting those around us to give us the grace and the mercy and the patience for us to do that work. And in doing that, that we see God present day in and day out in our lives, providing and sustaining us with exactly what it is that we need so that we can walk with Christ. Let's pray. God, as we go through these next few weeks, I pray that your Spirit would just sit heavy among us every time we reflect and think on these teachings. God, that your Spirit would convict us of those things that we feel that we've had to keep behind walls and masks, hidden from others, and some even hidden from ourselves. God, I pray that your fruit of the Spirit would be present and readily accessible to every single one of us. That we would not face the temptation that Richard Foster talks about of taking our service of others and parading it around so that it can continue to thwart our formation and destroy our attempts at drawing closer to you. God, continue to help us be a church that's on this mission from God to love the world, and that love comes as the way it did with Christ, with suffering and sacrifice in the process to restoration and reformation. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. Well, if I heard Jennifer correctly, we'll be starting a faith community church plant in Australia. And if you're interested in being part of that planting team, let us know and we'll get that started. I heard that right, Jennifer? Oh, she's not even in here to confirm it. Oh, there you are. Would you stand and I'll give you a blessing as you head into your week. May you go through your week and your eyes be opened. Persons who are dealing with the realities of Matthew 25. But may you also be given the spirit of discernment to see beyond the physical realm and into the spiritual reality of their lives, to see where people are hungry, thirsty, sick, naked, imprisoned, and alone. And may you be moved to step in and be the hands and feet of Christ in those moments. May God be with you. Go in God's peace.